What Jesus is offering us is a third path that is neither weak nor violent. Okay, so it's not cowering. It's not like, please don't hit me again. But it's also not escalating the violence. So, you imagine that person is like, pow. And then you're kind of like, do you want this one too? It's a controlled strength.
This is the Land in the Bible podcast. Welcome to the Land in the Bible podcast. We are so glad you're here today, and we're jumping back into the Sermon on the Mount. So what is our plan today?
Today I want to talk about a passage of Scripture that really good, strong believers often disagree about pretty vehemently. And of course, I'm going to give my opinion on it, which dear friends of mine would completely disagree on that are solid Bible scholars. We're going to be talking about the back, sort of the end of Matthew 5, where Jesus talks about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, loving your neighbors, or loving your enemies. And that whole thing about like, what is a Christian biblical perspective on, frankly, sort of like fighting and violence, and I've got dear good friends, obviously working, 20 something years in Israel, a place that is in some ways known for a certain amount of violence that takes place. Then, it's something you talk about, what is a Christian perspective on this? As a Christian, can you participate or not participate, or when do you, or when don't you? And so I have dear friends that are, Christian pacifists. They're completely 100%, as a Christian, as a believer, you can never participate in any sort of violence ever. You could never, be in the military, on a police force and things like that. I agree with some of their points. I'm not fully in that camp, but we'll delve into why and just kind of look at what Jesus says and then kind of think what he means. Again, this is one of those passages where I think it's a kind of a high grace passage. It's one where it is certainly, like it's not one of these things where you're like, you're wrong, you're dumb, I think it's one where the text says some things, but it also does leave some things open to interpretation, and Christians of good conscience can land on different sides of it. So that's fine. I want to break it down as best I can. I will say that what often happens when you start parsing, as a Christian, can you shoot somebody, or can you, fight, these kind of things, is that we jump to these, sort of crazy, what if somebody breaks in your house and is holding a gun to your daughter? What would you do? Sort of things that most of us will never have that experience, I mean, the idea that, but some people do. I mean, granted, in certain parts of the world, there is more, violence, and people deal with those issues more often than maybe we do, here in the sunny Southeast, of the United States. But the fact of the matter is, we tend to jump to exceptional, extreme cases to make the arguments which aren't really daily life, maybe. And I think maybe regarding daily life, there are some absolute things that all Christians can agree on that he's saying. And then when you push it out to those extremes, maybe there's some space for disagreement. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So I just want to look at, what does Jesus say about, as a Christian, when can we fight? How can we fight? Because, we're humans, right? That's what we do. It doesn't take much looking around this world to see that, right?
Right.
To see just constant conflict everywhere. And it's all sorts of conflict, right? Obviously, just a month ago as we're filming, you had the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, and, warfare going on there, and, millions of people probably being displaced and, becoming refugees, and, as a result of what's going on in that conflict. And then, we look back over this last year in our country, and it's not, because not all conflict is armed people shooting each other. There's also verbal, ugly that goes on, which is also a form of conflict and fighting. And, I think our culture is absolutely defined by that these days. Mm-hmm. And, especially online, when you have the cover of a keyboard and nobody can can see you and, you can just spew venom at the world. There's a whole lot of that, and people tend to jump to extreme positions and flame away at each other.
Is there a verse on trolling?
Yes, maybe. Probably the whole thing about, not calling your brother a fool or something like that fits somewhere, I don't know, in there, something like that. I mean, maybe being a peacemaker,
There you go.
Blessed are the peacemakers. Yeah. Might fit into that.
That's good.
Into that somewhere. Like, is what you're doing bringing any sort of value or positive
Dissension.
energy? Are you bringing peace to the world, or are you bringing more, hatred and division? That might be a good scriptural grid to run that through. But let's just listen to what Jesus says, and then see where we can go with it. And see if we can think about the context which he was saying it, what was going on. And the first thing I would say is this: if you're living in the United States, in most places, okay, now there may be an exception for certain contexts, but again, where we're sitting here in Atlanta, when I'm in America, I call home, South Alabama, which is also a pretty peaceful, nice, beaches and whatever kind of place. And this is a gross, if you're a beautiful area up here and pretty nice. When you start talking about enemies, we don't really have much of a concept of that. If I were to ask you, like, Josh, who are your greatest enemies? I mean, do you have a list of people that you're like, oh, I can't stand that? I mean, maybe you do. I don't know. Maybe you're more vicious than I think.
Yeah. My wife is on the HOA board, so now I don't have any enemies.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. So, for most of us, I mean, I put myself on the list is my own biggest problem, but yeah, we don't tend to have like an enemy. When I taught in Israel, and I would be sitting talking to typically taught Palestinian kids, Arab kids, and you're sitting in Bethlehem, and the town has a wall around it, that was placed there by the Israelis, and the kids that I'm working with aren't allowed to really leave their hometown.
Right.
For them, they had a very quick, like, oh, my enemies. So those guys on the wall.
Yeah.
So for them, it was like really quick, whatever you think of that politically, they had a concept of an enemy. Mm-hmm. Which we really, really don't have. And in certain parts of the world, where there's a lot of conflict, then they immediately get this, Yep. So it's like those guys, the guys with the guns that I don't like, Yeah. I don't know, pick a place, but that's, there are places where that's really easy. Well, the crowd that Jesus is talking to on this day had an enemy. It was the Roman soldiers that had come in and conquered the country and, were oppressing them. And if you fought against it, you might get crucified, you get your land seized, you're being extorted for, abusive levels of taxation, and all sorts of stuff was going on. They were, the Romans didn't necessarily like Jews because the Romans were pantheists. They believed in all the gods, and Jews only believed in one God. It's funny. The Romans would call Jews and later Christians, they would call them atheists. They're like, oh, you're atheist because you only have one God. You don't believe in all the other ones, And so there was religious turmoil. So when Jesus says enemy, they're like, oh, the guys over there with the swords and the shields and the uniforms. And if you touch one of them, they'll come to your house and haul your kids off and crucify you. Like, oh yeah, the enemy. Got it.
Right.
So again, as Christians in the South and the United States, I think it's a concept that we have a hard time maybe grasping, and that we have a hard time grasping the emotion of it. When a foreign power has come in and, and conquered your land and destroyed your home and taken your kids, and there's like, a real sense of oppression, then that's a lot harder to say, oh, you should love those guys over there. Like, love them. They crucified my uncle last weekend. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. So just try to process that, as best you can. I mean, like, as Americans, like back when I was a kid in the 80s, like the Russians or something like that, but they didn't ever show up here,
Yeah.
So it's different, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think, 20 years after 9/11, it's a little different. I mean, I would say 20 years ago, we probably had a little bit more of a sense of that
An
was a
enemy?
season where we felt like, ooh, we have enemies.
Yeah,
Like
maybe
very
so.
tangible.
Yeah, and maybe if you've done a tour like that
Yeah.
and you've seen some of those things, I've got a good friend who did some tours in Iraq, and he's actually a minister and works with Arab Muslim people now because he wants to sort of redeem some of that. But yeah, I think for guys like that have been in that context, maybe they have a little more context. And he even said that a part of why he wants to minister in that space is to sort of try to walk this out. You know, the people that killed my friends, I want to go back and that I was a part of killing some of them too, that he wants to somehow redeem that.
Yeah.
So maybe but really, again, for most Americans, what percentage of us really ever went to Iraq or Afghanistan? You know, we kind of hire that out these days.
Right.
You know, it's not like World War II where we send just everybody. You know, our military is a professional hired. Anyway, you get the point. You know, some of us have gone, but not everybody. So not everyone relates to that. But try to get into that space of really, really having an enemy who's really hurt you, who's really hurt your family, who's really done something to you that was, you know, not good. And as we walk through this,
I mean, I think the oppression note is a really good one too, because it's like, well, your enemy is like, I just don't. It's like, I don't like that person, or that's kind of like the context of our American context is like, well, are they really your enemy?
Somebody at school or work that's kind of mean to you, or something.
We're like talking about like you're saying, like, no, these are people that are taking you, crucifying your loved ones. You know, it's a different context for
and to get a view
power dynamic.
To get a view of how much Jewish people at the time of Christ despised the Romans. You know, later when the first Roman, Cornelius, comes to faith, you know, Peter, first off, has to even have a vision directly from God to even go talk to him. He doesn't want to talk to him. He goes, and it's the worst sermon ever preached. We'll probably do an episode at some point where he's like, I don't normally come talk to you people, but God told me I have to. So, and now I know that God can save anybody, you know, because he saved you. Like, as you read it and you're like, are you kidding me? You know, like, it's so racially charged what Peter's saying, you know, against Romans. And then he goes back to Jerusalem and tells the other apostles, and they're like, really? A Roman? Ooh, you know, like you're like, well, I guess, you know, okay. But you really get a sense for they didn't even think God could love these people. Yeah. You know? Yeah. So there's a strong animosity. Okay. Yep. So just sort of, you know, pack that away as we start to unwind this. So, all right. So Jesus says, verse 38, he says, you've heard it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Now, when Jesus says, you've heard it was said, he is generally quoting you know, Moses in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. Later, when he says, you've heard it was said, love your enemy, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, in verse 43, he's not quoting Moses at all. Moses does not anywhere say hate your enemy. He's quoting what was taught at the time, you know, by the Pharisees. So you have to parse that a little bit. But in this verse in 38, he's quoting Moses. You've heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Then he goes, but I tell you, do not resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. All right. So let's try to break that down a little bit. First off, there, you know, in Matthew, as you know, we did an earlier podcast about when Jesus spoke at the in Luke 4, when he spoke in the synagogue of Capernaum. And it says that they were astonished because he spoke with authority. This is exactly what it's talking about when it says Jesus spoke with authority, because what Jesus is doing here is correcting, and I would say extending, what Moses said. Okay, so you've got to think it's a Jewish crowd. They're steeped in, now it's a mixed crowd. There's also Phoenicians and Greeks and Romans there. You know, there's other kinds of people too, but it's primarily a Jewish crowd. Jesus is speaking to his disciples. So this is how, if you're going to follow Jesus, you're going to be one of his disciples, how you're supposed to act. So it's probably mostly Jews sitting close to him, really listening well. And so he quotes Moses, a scripture they would have all known, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And then he says, oh, but I'm going to tell you. And so that is kind of shocking that he would just be like, well, I've got the right to extend this and change it and morph it around a little. Let me explain that to you and take it further, which is kind of crazy. Now, some people will read this and hear contradiction. Okay. Moses said one thing, I'm saying another. What I'm going to say, what I would like to just to throw out there is a different way of viewing it, which is extension. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you know the Middle East, what normally happens there is like there are laws, but the written laws aren't necessarily what makes society work. Okay. In a lot of Middle Eastern countries, certainly, where I lived and dealing with Palestinian people on a regular basis, and in other parts of the Middle East too, it's not just there. There is a strong tribal system. Mm-hmm. And that goes back for hundreds, even thousands of years. And the way it kind of works, and I think we talked about this a little bit in an earlier episode, but it's really pertinent here, so I'll review it a little bit, is the reason bad things don't happen is because the community won't accept it. Okay? So, a good example might be because there's a real strong sense of sort of like sexual morality in the Middle East. And so if somebody says something or does something inappropriate in the direction of your daughter, will you haul that kid back to his, daddy and you say, he said this and you accept that? Is this how your family acts? A little bit of a shaming kind of thing that goes on there. And then they're like, oh, no, we don't accept that. And they'll deal with their mm-hmm. kid. And generally speaking, it goes away. So sort of the tribal system of, handles things. Well, in a violent situation, so maybe it goes like this. You've got two kids at school, say they're 16, 17 years old, so a little bit older. Or maybe they're like walking home from school one day and, boys being stupid and you get this, it happens here too. I remember I was hiking years ago in East Tennessee up in the mountains. I was about 20 years old mm-hmm. and we were trying to go up to this swimming hole and jump in the water. And there were some local guys there that were a little bit on the drunk side, and a couple of them wanted to have fun with their buddy. And so they're like, as we passed by, they're like, he said something about your mama. So the next thing I know, I have this, drunken dude that I've never even seen before wanting to fight me because I talked about his mom. I didn't say anything about his mom. I didn't even know. I was like, you're dumb. Go away. Leave me alone. But we almost had to have a fight in the middle of the woods that day because,
yeah,
boys can be stupid sometimes, Yeah, and his friends thought it would be amusing to set him after us and see what happens. And there you go. So dumb things happen with teenage boys, and that's universal. That's in all cultures. And so, in our scenario here, you got two boys walking home, or one boy walking home, and another boy sees him and decides he wants to mess with him, and a fight ensues. And one of the boys gets the better of the other. Let's say he, gives him a black eye and a busted lip or something like that and sends him on his way. But what happens in the context of the Middle East and, large families they have out there is that kid that got beat up goes home. His brothers and cousins, who probably even live in the same building as him, or certainly on the same block, see that and they're like, who did it? And then, 3 or 4 of them go find that kid. And then they beat him up worse. Mm-hmm. So so the first kid gets a busted lip and a black eye. The next kid gets all of that plus a broken nose, let's say. And then so they feel better. And then he goes home, and then his people get mad about that. And they go find some of those guys and, put one of them in the hospital with a broken arm or something. And then they get mad about that. And they go back and, slash some tires and break some windows at their house. And it just escalates. And I've seen fights with 40, 50 guys from two families all just going nuts, trying to really hurt each other because it's not justice. It's escalating violence. It's revenge. Okay. So Moses comes along and he's trying to break that pattern. He's like, if somebody, knocks out your tooth, you don't get to kill them, we're going to do justice. And you get to knock their tooth out. Okay, we still kind of recoil from that a little bit now, but you have to understand what Moses is doing. He's trying to say, like, we don't do vengeance, we don't do escalating violence, we do justice. Okay, that's better than tribal violence.
Yeah,
granted. But Jesus comes along and he's like, no, we're going to extend this even further, and we're gonna learn something new. Okay, so that's what Jesus is doing. Moses got us this far down the road. Now I'm going to take you the rest of the way home. Now, so let's get what he says. I tell you, don't resist the evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. Now, we don't have a whole lot of room to move around here, but let's assume you and I were going to square up to fight. Okay, so we're like this, right? Now, well, that's your wrong. That's your left cheek, though. It's the wrong one. There you go. That's the right. So if I'm going to hit you on your right cheek, most people are right-handed. To hit you on your right cheek probably is like
you're in back slap.
Is like probably a backhanded slap. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, unless I'm throwing a left which is maybe not typical of what usually comes. Yeah. If I'm squaring up to fight, with a guy who I respect. Like, I think 50-50 I might lose, even 25-30% I might lose. Then I'm not opening the fight with a backhand.
Yeah.
I'm opening the fight with the best shot I've got. I'm gonna try to throw a right hook or an uppercut.
Yeah.
I want to try to really hurt you with the first shot so I can hopefully win this fight.
Yeah.
So if I'm starting a conflict with you by backhanding you, what is immediately implied is I have no respect for you whatsoever. Okay.
That's a deep cut from this text. I like that.
Yeah. So it's this is what
it's a disrespectful. You're already saying if they slap you on the right, then you're just saying they're disrespected. That's already disrespectful.
Oh, deeply.
Yeah.
So I mean, when you envision that, you envision like a backhanded slap, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm going to be careful how I say all this, but that's like when you think of like a man abusing his wife or something. I don't know. I can almost think of like mafia stuff. Like like the guys there to collect the debt or something, and you haven't paid.
Well, it's almost like a power dynamic thing, because you could imagine them perceiving it as being, I see it in my head, someone being brought in and then someone in authority being like, and they probably perceived it that way.
Right. So now let's think through the normal human responses. So somebody, they backhand you like that. I think that there's maybe two normal, natural human responses to that. One is to fight, like to feel so disrespected and so like, now we're going to, now we're going to fight. The other response that I could think of, if it is like a power dynamic issue, right? So it is the mafia boss and you owe him money, or, it's some sort of soldier or, policeman in a despotic country, where you're in real trouble now, then I could see cowering and begging as a response to that, right? And I think that's, basically the two normal human responses in a situation like that. What Jesus is offering us is a third path that is neither weak nor violent. Okay, so it's not cowering. It's not like, please don't hit me again, and please I'll do what It's not curling up in the fetal position in the corner, but it's also not escalating the violence. So you imagine that person is like, pow, and then you're kind of like, do you want this one too? You're gonna hit me here too? It's kind of,
it's a strength in a way.
I think certainly.
Yeah.
It's a controlled strength. Mm-hmm. It's like really confronting the person, but it's not escalating the conflict either. And I think it's something that's so not natural, but it also just kind of makes so much sense that no one who observed that would think, what a coward, what a wuss, what a weakling. But it's controlled, and it's strong, but it's also creating space for that conflict for something different to happen.
Yeah.
Than just, animals fighting.
Right.
And then he goes on and gives us another example, which in some ways is even more interesting. It's the same thing. It's sort of a third path. And he says this, he says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now, that's something that we don't necessarily understand in our culture. This was a Roman military practice, okay? So Roman soldiers typically carried about a 70-pound backpack. 70 pounds is heavy, okay? And a Roman soldier in a day would often cover 12, 15, sometimes 18 miles or more, I'm actually currently, you can't tell from looking at me, but currently, trying to sort of train for a hike I'm going to do in the summer where we're going to do about 12 or 15 miles a day. And I'm trying to carry a 15-pound backpack. And even at 15 pounds, like over the course of 12 or 15 miles up hills, it starts to get heavy.
Yeah.
Well, a 70-pound pack with spears and swords and shields and sleeping gear and cooking gear and, whatever, all the stuff they carried, it was very heavy.
Yeah.
And so the Romans had a law. And the law said if you were in conquered territories, these were not Roman citizens, that if you passed someone working in the fields or whatever, going about their daily life, you could compel them to carry your pack for a mile. So, you over there, come here, give them your backpack, again, 60, 70 pounds, and make them walk carrying it for a mile. That's tough work. Also, you think, this person is probably newly conquered. They don't like you very much. Maybe your armies just got through wrecking their land, destroying their farms, killing some of their cattle, whatever. Maybe some of their relatives. They hate you, and they're trying to put their lives back together, scrape together some sort of subsistence and survive and live. And now all of a sudden, instead of working in their farm or putting their house back together, they're going to spend the next couple of hours walking a mile down the road, carrying a really, really heavy pack and having to walk back again. So it's a sort of a grotesque imposition on a person. I mean, really, when you think about it, to now have to serve these people that have, hurt you, wrecked your life. And so again, what are the normal human responses in that situation? You could be real snarky and ugly about it. Like, I hate you. Or, you could maybe try to fight about it and be like, I'm not going to do it. In which case you might get killed in that situation. You could do it like a victim. You could, like, you guys did this and you did that. No, fine, I'll do it, but I hate you, and these are normal human responses. Act like a victim, have a fight. And Jesus says, no, let's do something different. At the end of mile 1, say, man, you look tired. I know you got to walk 15 miles today, so I'll carry this bag for you 1 more. It's just a total change. It's a total change of the power dynamic. Instead of you've been compelled to walk 1, now you're offering to walk the second. So now you've taken that abusive Roman soldier, and instead of he's making you do something and you're a victim, you're saying, hey man, I'll help you out. You look like you've had a rough day. I know you got a long way to walk. And you're just changing the whole context, by choosing to step outside of your pride and your hate and all that kind of stuff. And so what I think he's doing with a lot of these verses is he's just offering, again, a third path that is not what humans do, and you got to think, like, what if more people acted that way? What if more people chose to de-escalate, serve, not be a victim? What if people chose that? Like, how would that make society change? Well, obviously, I think quite different.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I do want to push a little bit at the turn the other cheek thing, and Christians and violence. And now I am going to jump for a minute or two into just my opinion. Okay, so on this one, absolutely feel free to have different opinions.
Right.
Okay. I think where Jesus leaves us, with all the things he says here, and I emphasize two of them, but there's more. He also talks about, if anyone wants to sue you, take away your shirt, let him have your coat as well, which is just more of the same really as the going the extra mile. I'll be like, oh, you want my shirt? Well, you can have this too. Is that what you want? And again, it's just sort of changing context, not getting in the mud and fighting over things, but, just charting a different path, So he kind of has some more to say, but regarding the strike to the cheek, I like to point out things he doesn't say. He doesn't say if someone hits you with a baseball bat to let them hit you again. He doesn't say if someone strikes your wife on her cheek, tell her to turn the other one.
Right.
He doesn't say if somebody hits your kid. And so for me, again, I'm just giving this point. This is definitely just my opinion. Okay. But my opinion on all of this is where he leaves us is with absolutely no freedom whatsoever to fight, whether verbally or physically, in defense of our pride or our ego, or just sort of our personal selfish motives. In the case of, you called my mom with something, or this guy called you or whatever, I don't get to fight over that.
Right.
As a Christian, I don't think there's any version of a Christian who can read these scriptures and think that you get to engage in conflict and fighting for the sake of your pride or your ego. I think he completely, and that's really what 80-90% of human conflict, I think, is just personal stuff, which is completely nixed here. I regarding these things that are on the edge of that, I don't think he precludes your ability to defend yourself when your well-being is truly threatened. I don't think he precludes your ability to protect your family, when they're truly threatened. I would argue that you actually have a responsibility to do those things. Certainly regarding your wife and your kids and your family. So I just, that's where I land on all that, and it's open for interpretation. But I think he's completely taking away, again, your ability or your freedom, if you want to follow him, to just be sort of prideful, self-assertive, and to be violent, to, whether again physically or verbally, to pursue those ends. Other things, I think that's open to interpretation from people that of goodwill, if that makes any sense.
And I've heard this explain, well, not fully fleshed out, but when Jesus is with his disciples, he tells them, hey, we need to get this and that, and we grab some swords. They don't really say what they're going to do with them, but I mean, they're not going to be like LARPing.
Yeah, well, and yeah, they weren't starting armed insurrection. They were like,
Right.
We've got one or two, and he's like, yeah, it's enough, So
Right.
so it's not like they were trying to like start a small army, but yeah.
But on some level, it's like, well, this is not about that. This is like there's things that are also like against the law, and it's like, no, I'm like protecting, like you're like, and you're in your home, and it's like, well, this is my home, and I'm living in my home, and this is my family, and this is like,
yeah, and
it's not
for
like,
me. For me, I don't think, and again, this is just getting into personal convictions on things.
Right.
So I don't think I could do violence to anyone over protection of a thing I owned.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to hit somebody because over my car or my computer, though I really, really don't want them broken,
Right.
I don't have just disposable income to throw at
You're
these
like,
things.
fine, man.
But I don't think I'm going to do violence over it.
Right.
But if you touch one of my kids, I probably would.
Right.
Yeah. So for me, that's where my line is.
Yeah.
I'll defend humans that I love. I think, I mean, Now we're getting into our culture, but
Yeah.
as males, we do tend to be a little bigger and stronger and faster. And I do think we have a responsibility before God to protect, our families and our kids. I think, that's why he gave us that. So, I don't see that precluded at all.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, but then he just takes it and goes to an extent it's crazy.
Yeah.
Because then he goes, if you look in verse 43, it says, you've heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, again, the Old Testament never says hate your enemy. That's not in the book. That's what was being taught by the Pharisees. It's not in there. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you might be children of your Father in heaven. For he causes the sun to rise in the evil and the good, and sends the rain. By the way, rain in the context of a desert is a blessing. Okay, we think of rainy days as being sad. That's in the desert.
Right.
That's a great blessing. God sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward will you have? Don't even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what are you doing out of the ordinary? Don't even the Gentiles do the same? And then you have this lovely commandment that is, be perfect, therefore, as your Father in heaven is perfect. Oh, just go be perfect. Great, Jesus, I'm on it, But, love your neighbor, pray for them, bless them. Later, Paul expands on it and says to feed them and clothe them. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't like those people. Love them. The Romans, they're crucifying people, they're taxing us into oblivion. They're wrecking our society. They're trying to put their eagles and their symbols on our temple, which is blasphemy. Like, Jesus, do you see who these people are? Love them? I don't want to love them. But it's what he says. Love your enemy. Pray for them. Bless them. And what do you do with that?
Mm-hmm.
And if you've lived on this earth, I started off by saying that as Americans, we don't tend to, have people that we immediately recognize as enemies. But if you've lived on this earth long enough to be an adult, probably less than that, at some point you've had someone deeply, significantly wrong or hurt you. That's happened to you. At some point you've had an abuser, you had a kid in high school that was just vicious to you. Like there are certain, I remember thinking back on my high school years. I won't say a name, but like, there's one certain kid that I look back on, and when I was in like 7th, 8th, 9th grade, this guy just did his best to make my life hell for 3 years, Mm-hmm. And so when someone just like makes your life awful for 3 or 4 years when you're developing, like there's a real angst there, it was like, that guy. And then, in my adult life, there have been people that have, said and done some pretty vicious, awful things to me and my family. And so Jesus says, love them, bless them, pray for them. That's tough. I think this is where he moves it to a space that's really, really just not natural for us. And so what's he doing? Like, why? And I think what he's doing here, because we all say these words and we don't think what we're saying. We all say like, oh, you're a Christian, so we should be Christ-like. You should be like Jesus. I want to be like Jesus. Well, what did Jesus do? He suffered and died to create space for the forgiveness of people who hated him, disliked him, disrespected him, abused him, sinned against him, violated,
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, he's on the cross getting nailed, to a board, and he's praying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. So you want to be Christ-like,
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is the walking embodiment of two concepts of mercy and of grace. Okay. So, without going too long or too deep into that, just the very, very simple definition of those. And if you've been around a church for more than 5 minutes, you probably heard this, but mercy is not giving someone something they deserve. Okay. Someone has hurt you. They've sinned against you. They've abused you, or your family or someone you love. Like, they deserve pain, suffering, retribution, bad stuff from you. They deserve it. You have the power to do it, and you choose not to. That's what mercy is. Like, you've been wronged by this person. Now all of a sudden they're in a vulnerable position. You have the moment when you could get it back. You have the power to do it. No one could say it was wrong, and you choose not to. You choose not to deliver that blow. Okay? That's mercy. Grace even goes beyond that, which that's blessing that person. So now it's the person who doesn't deserve anything from you. And not only are you withholding, vengeance, mercy, and an assault on them that would be justified, now you're going so far as to do something nice for them. You're buying them a cup of coffee. You're being nice to their kids for some reason. Like you're blessing this person that violated you. That's tough. But it's what Jesus did. So if we're going to be Christ-like, then the same way we were extended grace and mercy, we have to extend grace and mercy. That's not fun. That's nothing anybody wants to do, but it's the reality. It's what we all want, right? So I always think of it like this. I spent, a lot of years of my life in, doing education in, schools in the Middle East. That was sort of our platform out there. And, as a school administrator, it would be incredibly normal to have a kid, he's in trouble, he did something bad. He comes in the office, right? And he's like, Mr. Jameson, please. Yeah, it was bad. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that, curse this teacher. So I don't want to just make something up, right? The kid did something bad, it was bad. I'm so sorry. But this isn't it really me, and let's say you've got a written policy, and the policy says if the student does this, they're suspended for X number of days or something like that, which will be really bad for their grades. And, the kid's trying to get into college or something. So he wants good grades. He's suspended. He gets some zeros and he gets a C or a D, and it hurt his, and he's just like, please don't. I know what the rules are. I know it was bad. I know you could do it, but please, this is not who I am. I'll never do it again. And they're just begging because they want mercy. They want you as the person in authority to extend mercy to them. I've done wrong. I deserve punishment. As the punisher, I'm asking you not to. Mm-hmm. Okay? They're begging mercy, right? And let's say you would do it. You're like, all right, you're right. I'm going to cut you some slack this time. If I ever get you in your government's office again, next time it's the full letter of the law. And I'm going to get you, you sort of, you come to some agreement and you're like, all right, I'm going to cut you some slack and get out of here. And they go on their merry way. Well, let's say the same kid, a day or two later, some kid does something to him. So, some kid said something bad about him, cursed his mom, smacked him. I don't know, whatever. Does something to him. Now, another kid's in the office. And that kid's making the same plea. Oh, mister, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Is that who I really am? Would you forgive? And so you do the same thing that you did a couple days before, and you cut that kid some slack. Well, then the first kid comes in the office and is like, Mr. Jameson, you are supposed to suspend him and beat him and call his parents. And why isn't he getting fully punished for what he did to me?
Does this happen a lot? Is this a true story?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I know it is.
Like the same kid who, when they're in the office, is begging for mercy, when they've been violated, want justice.
Right.
That's what humans do.
Absolutely.
It's what I do.
I'd never do that. I'm not me.
Okay. Well, just this summer, I took my family on sort of the Great American Road Trip, and we drove to California and back. And we did the northern route going to California and the southern route coming back. And so on the way out there, we were driving Interstate 80 through Nebraska, and there's, eastern Nebraska is kind of pretty. Western Nebraska is a lot of nothing. We're in the middle of nothing. It's 10, 11 o'clock at night, and I'm going like 85 and a 70, and all of a sudden, here's the lights. You're like, oh, no. So the cop comes up, and you're busted. I'm like 15 miles an hour over. Like, I mean, there's no getting around it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, here's my license, here's my card, please be nice,
Yeah.
and you're hoping, whatever, when the cop comes up, whatever you've got, to try to get like, well, I'm sick, or it's an emergency because my something or another, or whatever you've got, you're going to throw it at him, and hope you get the warning, because you want mercy.
Yeah.
We're all like that. In that situation, the cop, he took my information. He goes back, and it was my birthday, actually. It was 11 o'clock at night. I had like 1 hour left of my birthday. He gave me a warning. He comes back to the car, and he was like, "It's your birthday, Mr. Creel?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He says, "Well,
happy birthday.
Happy birthday, carry on." He's like, "Watch the rest of the night." I was like, "Thank you, God." and officer, and moved on because, you want mercy, right? But then somebody speeds down your street, and you want the cops to ring them up.
Right.
So adults don't change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Jesus is saying, stop being a hypocrite. Extend to people what you want. You want mercy, not justice. Give mercy, not justice. Give grace and blessing. And when that person violates you, they've disrespected you. They've backhanded you. They've made you walk a mile. Whatever has happened. What you now have is a golden opportunity to, and I heard somebody say it one time and it rhymes, so I like it, is you have a chance to be the face of mercy and grace. You get to demonstrate to this person what Jesus Christ looks like. You get to put the same way Jesus put flesh in the Word of God. You get to put flesh in the Word of God. You get to go be a little walking example of the character and nature of Jesus Christ by bringing blessing and mercy and grace into a place where there should have been a fight or a conflict. Mm-hmm. And everybody will see it. And that person, you never know, you never, ever know what happens. We've been reflecting some of these back to the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers. In Hebrew, peace means more than what it means in English. So for us, peace just basically means an absence of conflict or calm. In Hebrew, of course, you've all heard probably the term shalom or whatever. And it's a common greeting in Hebrew to say like, "Ma shalomcha," which means like, how are you doing? How's your peace? Because peace for them means more. It means basically your general well-being, like basically, how are you? So a peacemaker is someone who not only brings, an absence of conflict, diffuses conflict, it's someone who increases the general well-being. You just kind of make people better by being around, is what that really means. And, people will see you as that if you will walk in mercy and grace. It's hard, it's difficult, it's not fun, but people see it. We're a little bit long today, but I'll give you just one example really quick of what that has looked like in my life, maybe one time. So I used to coach basketball as a part of our ministry and our work, and I love it to this day. And I was coaching a girls' basketball game, and I had a bunch of little Palestinian Arab girls, and Palestinians don't tend to be as tall as Americans. And so we went and took our school to play the American International School, which is where all the State Department kids, diplomat corps, kids go there. So it's all these Americans. They're, kind of the privileged, richish kids, that get to go to a fancy private school, and they tend to be, they're Americans. They're taller and they're bigger. And so it's an uphill climb anyway for my little, tiny Arab girls to go play them. But we're we were scrapping and we were fighting and we were doing pretty well. And in that context, there was a dad from the American school that was sitting right in midcourt. In the whole game, he was not just cheering for his daughter, but he was cheering against us. Like, he was saying things like, "They're not any good. She can't dribble. Don't worry about her. Let them shoot." Like he was not just cheering for them, but like being derogatory towards my girls who I loved. Yeah. And so that was bothering me a lot. Yeah. And at some point there was there was a foul call that I didn't like. And so I'm kind of yelling at the ref, and I stepped out in the court to sort of have a conversation with the referee. And as I'm talking to the ref, trying to get understanding of what happened, this guy's just like, tee him up, give him a tack. Like, he's just yelling like an idiot. And I know better. I coached basketball for a long time. You never interact with the crowd. You just don't do it. You don't do it. It's never good. You don't do it.
Yeah.
I know that, but I'm a human. And on this day, I blew it, right?
Right.
So at some point, I looked at the guy and I'm like, shut up, you idiot, or something like that, like across the basketball court. I'm like,
Yeah.
Well, the guy walks across the basketball court, gets right in my face, and is yelling all sorts of, he got really ugly. Like, he's yelling expletives and stuff. You want to go outside, F this and F that. It was bad. You know? And I'm just like, get out of here, dude. And he kind of walks off, and we had to go back there and play again about 2 or 3 weeks later. So I'm praying about it. I'm like, God, I got to go back there and pray. And I felt in my heart what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Which is that if that guy's there, I have to apologize to him.
Yeah.
Because even though what he did was wrong, what I did was wrong. Like, I shouldn't have engaged him. I shouldn't have called him an idiot in front of, a whole stadium full of people.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about it. I'm like, if he's there, I got to do it. I'm like, God, just don't let it be there. I don't want to deal with this. I just don't want to deal with this. And so, come out of the locker room, walk out, and there's the guy right at front row.
Totally there. Yeah.
So I just walked right over to him, and I leaned in. I was like, "Hey, man, sorry for last week." And he's like, and he reciprocates. He's like, "Yeah, me too. I was out of line." I was like, "Yeah, me too." Cool. And I walk back over to my girls, and they're like, "Why did you do that? We hate him. Why did you apologize to him?" I'm like, "Because I should have." You should have. But like, so my girls that I was working with saw it,
right?
And that's the point of it all, right? Like, they saw me extend forgiveness, a little bit of mercy, a little bit of grace,
mm-hmm.
Be a little bit humble, say I was wrong, to someone who had set themselves up as an enemy. And it's in a small way, right? It's over a basketball game, but when you're a teenage girl, that matters. They saw that, and man, did they mark it. They were like shocked, appalled, just like whatever but they saw it, right? And in our lives, in those moments, you've been wronged, be the face of mercy and grace.
Mm-hmm.
Be Christ-like. Walk in that for a minute. It'll change your whole world, and everyone will see it, and no one will have any capacity to question, your walk, your faith.
Yeah, I have an example of that. That with certain clients, sometimes things just kind of go sideways, and you don't really know why. It's like their expectations are different than what you feel like we agreed upon at the beginning, and there's a lot of times that we have every right to be like, you owe us this. We did the work. You're not happy for some reason, but this is what we said we were going to do, and there's this contract. But a lot of times when those things happen, what we do is we just give them their money back. We'll get to the end of a project and someone is not happy and they didn't want this, they didn't want that. This is not what I wanted. I'm like, you know what? Here's your money back. I'm sorry. You can go hire someone else to do it. And we've done that a handful of times, and it always diffuses the situation. It makes something that could be not good for us, not good for them, and we just part ways, being like, basically just mad about the relationship. It almost always, and I've had times when we've done that and the relationship has been bad, and then we give them their money back, and then we get referrals from them for future work, because they're just like, oh yeah, you're right, and it does like what you said. Like, they're like, sorry, I know. We had this going on and we couldn't do this or that, and they start explaining how they were at fault too, and we're like, no, it's cool. Like, here's all your files, here's your money back. Have fun, and we wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, and
it's just always better if you can be the peacemaker, and even if you have to eat it, like, no matter what it is, it just in the end.
Well, it's that or just live in conflict, right?
Yeah.
And like, who wants to be that guy?
Yeah. So some people do, but it's not great. It doesn't help your inside. You're in here. You're still twisted up and
No, I heard somebody say one time that forgiveness is in some ways a selfish virtue, because by releasing them, you let yourself be at peace. Almost.
No, and I mean, I think that's a lot of this comes down to, like, that's how I kind of saw the eye for an eye aspect. Is it's like it is always a personal issue. It's like, what is for you? Like, how do you handle it? So I thought this was interesting. All right, well, that's all for this episode. And as always, check us out on thelandinthebible.com for more content. See you guys later.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, click like and subscribe. It really helps us. And if you really enjoyed it, go on over to our website, thelandinthebible.com, and become a supporter. It helps us generate more content and gives you access to our full library of video and Bible study content.